let's have a lesson and discussion on this work. Follow a lesson for free from the video. But if you're interested, I do have a sheet music edition of this partita, and there's a link for that in the description. This is a wonderful little piece, this 4-movement partita. It's great because it's so authentically Baroque sounding and has so much energy and that little bit of that Italian flavor to it, almost Vivaldi-like flavor to it, and yet it's not outrageously difficult. It's not as thick as Weiss or Bach. With Weiss, you're reducing the music from a lute with many choruses or many strings, and in Bach and stuff, it's almost not lute or guitar music. So with this though, we are arranging it from a 6-string instrument. It's transferring very well, and you get an authentic Baroque sound with a texture that isn't too thick, and it's not so difficult. If you bring it to higher tempos and you add lots of ornamentation and refinement to it, of course, there's definitely the opportunity here for a very advanced performance. But in terms of actually just playing these works, not too much difficulty. One of the curious things about these works is that when you look at the Baroque tablature, the ornament symbol that he uses is kind of a comma-like symbol, and this is common in many Baroque tablatures, but it's a comma and it can go on either side of the number indicating an ornament that's starting on either the upper auxiliary or the lower auxiliary. So in other words, the note above the written note or the note below the written note. But it's not specifically telling you what ornament to play. The majority of the time you're going to play an appoggiatura, and that's what's going to happen a lot of the time. But when it's an upper auxiliary, you might also play a trill or any other ornament. Ornamentation is flexible. It can be added, omitted, it can be flexible, it can be improvised. So what I've done in my score is I've written a short trill symbol for all of the ornaments that start on the upper auxiliary. And I've used the short trill symbol with a lower prefix for all the ornaments that start on the lower auxiliary. And you can either follow that or not. It's really up to you, but I'll demonstrate as I go along. I think we'll just start going through the piece. I'm not going to talk too much about the piece. The piece is, somewhat significant, so like make sure you're at the level to play the piece to begin with. I've graded it around the grade 6 level. If you add lots of ornamentation and bring the tempos high, then it can definitely go into an advanced realm. And if you lower the tempo, and this is kind of like your introduction to playing a full partita, it can be, grade 5, possibly. One thing I'll say before we go through the piece, though, is that when you're practicing this style of Baroque music, I'd recommend that you practice it without the ornamentation first. Practice just the written notes in the piece. Get to know that really solidly. The piece sounds beautiful without any ornamentation, so you can just play the piece as written without ornamentation, get it down solid, and then add the ornamentation on top. And that's a really good idea for 2 reasons. One reason, it's very good for your technique, just to be able to play the primary notes cleanly and really solid. But the other reason is ornamentation is just that. It's ornamenting the actual written notes. So you want to make sure that your ear is oriented towards the written notes, and that the ornamentation is just this decorative experience that surrounds the written notes. So practice the written notes without the ornamentation, and then if you want, you can start adding them in. If you're not at the level to add them in, then just don't. But if you are, then you can start decorating the written notes, but you'll be decorating something that's already worked out and beautiful and solid. You'll just be elaborating upon that success. So in the first movement, we want kind of like a not too quick. It's like an entrance, not quite like a prelude. It's not improvisatory. It's more stately, but definitely like not too hurried. And you can tell, like in in my recording, I play that first ornament as an appoggiatura first. The second time I play it as a slur. I mean, as a trill. So it's flexible, but both times I start on the upper auxiliary, or the upper note. So in this case, A to G. All those slurs are from the original manuscript. You can add more in if you like, or you can ignore them. I use them all. For measure 5. Any of those ornaments with parentheses around them, that they're editorial, I've added those in. And I end up having to do lots of those cadential ones as a cross string trill. So E, D sharp, E, D sharp. And I go A, M, I, P. A, M, I, P. And I'm very faithful to the original tablature, but in this particular case, I did raise that high E there. The original is a low E, but it sounds so nice to start from the upper note and descend down. Going on. That's editorial as well. That one I'm doing B, A sharp, B, A sharp, cross string trill again. You can leave those out if you want to. So all those I'm playing as appoggiaturas. So C to B, G to F sharp. Measure 21. Same thing there, cross string trill. That one is editorial. And I've raised that one E up an octave. The minuet, you want a pretty strong sense of 3 with lots of emphasis on the first and third beat, but mainly on the first beat. And it should move a little bit more. You want some good movement here. So there's that lower prefix, and so that's it's kind of like suspension from the measure before. So I just play that as an appoggiatura. And then from the upper note on the next one, right? I'll start again. I'm playing all appoggiaturas there. There's that lower auxiliary again, creating that suspension from the C. And most of my fingering works with guide fingers, so slide 4 down. It doesn't always look like the guide finger is there because it's not, the fingering isn't in the music when there's an ornament, only the written note is fingered. But when you add the upper auxiliary, that other finger is used. Once you start playing the piece, you'll get used to that. You don't have to add the ornaments in, but if you do, you'll find that they all work with guide fingers. So for measure 17, I do appoggiaturas first. couple of the octave lines there to keep the bass register more consistent. He isn't always super consistent. Sometimes he uses open strings and then it jumps around. So just in this one case, though, it's so nice to create an actual, really flowing lower voice that's more consistent. But I've marked them all in the score there. Now the second time through 17, I changed those ornaments to trills. You don't have to follow what I'm doing. I'm just letting you know what I did in the performance just to get ideas flowing in your mind. You have to be close to the frets. Close to the frets, you squeak. Okay, on to the next movement. This one is actually, surprisingly, despite the slower tempo, is probably the most difficult movement just because it's a little bit more involved, and because of the slower tempo, you need to just make sure it's quite refined. That one's editorial. And with a lot of the ornaments in this particular one, on the repeat, I'll add extra ornamentation, or I'll add the extra editorial ones that I've added. But maybe the first time through, you don't add anything extra. It's up to you. That's what I like to do, is just ornament a little bit more heavily on the second time through, or heavenly on the second time through, whichever. Since it's not cadential. So I changed there. I didn't want to. Whenever I finger things in upper positions in this, it just doesn't sound quite right, and I have to do a shift often. I like to just switch during the arpeggio. But it's up to you. You could switch earlier. You'll notice in my performance too, like sometimes I'll do trills with these and sometimes I'll do appoggiatures. I change it up regularly. From measure 9. That trill that I've marked with an actual TR trill is actually marked in the manuscript as a trill. So for some reason, he specifically wants a trill there. I do that trill starting on the written note just for variety, because there's been so many upper auxiliary ornaments in the piece that I just go from the written note. There was no good way for me to finger this next part in order to get the proper sustain from the lower voice, so I decided to do it up here with a little tiny bit of a stretch here. And then you hinge off it, so you have this bar down. And keep sustaining the bass note. I did decide to play this in upper position, just for stability. That way you could hold on to that third finger there. So. That's editorial, of course. play the piece as written first, add ornamentation afterwards. Get to know the piece, play it beautifully without ornamentation, then add the ornamentation in to get a feel for what the music is and what the ornamentation does with the music. So now the jig is I mean, at slower tempos, not too difficult, but at faster tempos, of course, it gets more challenging. Quite a bit of navigation here. Definitely want to be comfortable with your slurs, your descending slurs. But besides that, it's definitely much thinner of a texture than many Baroque lute works in this style. So enjoy it. Play it slowly at first and just work up your tempo. It's a good workout technique-wise, but not overly taxing in terms of counterpoint or something like that. I like to do a little bit of a fade out on those. Not that much maybe, but like not playing them too bluntly. The cross string trill is hard to add in there because it's going fast. G, F sharp, G, F sharp. But again, just leave it out. It sounds fine without it. And sometimes I have to kind of like cram those 2 eighth notes into a single ornament to make it work, right? Next half. You'll notice some slight oddity fingerings here and there, but it's meant to work with guide fingers and also to keep things in first position so it's sounding crisp and clean and energetic. So 2 to 4 there. That way 4 can guide down. Same thing there, you can guide 4 up. 3 guides down. I did experiment with playing that like up here, but it's kind of sounded a little bit mushy, and you have to shift right afterwards anyway. So I decided to use that guide finger and get a nice crisp chord, and then it actually guides again into the next chord, making it quite stable actually. Despite all the shifting, it's fairly stable because of the guide fingers. So here you can just let it grow a little bit. Again, I kind of have to mash those 2 eighth notes together to get the cross string trill in there. One thing I'll say is in measure 35, I continue the right hand fingering that I've been doing. Starting back in 32, I'll go M, I, M, I, M, M, I, M, I. Then I go M, I, M, A, M, M, I, M, A, M. If you're stumbling on that measure, maybe you want to try that fingering. You can actually do multitude of other fingerings. I think I actually play it the first time through. I play it with that fingering, but the second time I think I just do something else. I'm just alternating fingers, right? But if you find that challenging, you can try that out. At a slower tempo, this movement is fairly straightforward. Like even playing through it there, I was like, oh, this isn't too hard. But once you start raising that tempo, suddenly like I find that my like slur technique starts to get sloppier. Sometimes when I shift, I'm not close to the fret, so I get a buzz. And that continues. So the more you know it, and the more you can keep your technique in order, and just raise that tempo slowly during your practice sessions, you can just kind of raise it up and keep it clean. but I've certainly fingered the music to orient towards first position for just like a clear, bright, energetic sound, but also to utilize those guide fingers whenever possible. So keep an eye out for that when you're shifting to see if there's a finger that can stay on that string as you shift. I hope you enjoyed that. The wonderful collection of movements in this partita, just such a wonderful level to the piece, and so authentic sounding and energetic.